Now, Rian Johnson just did a big interview with Rolling Stone magazine, and he was asked several questions about Star Wars, or The Last Jedi in particular. And so, what we're going to do here is we're going to see what he had to say about his Star Wars movie. I'm just going to read the question, I'll read his answer, and I'll give you my take on it. Alright, so getting right to it, the first question he was asked was, with Last Jedi, there was a popular conception that you and JJ Abrams didn't really talk, which is why certain ideas get undone from one movie to the next. What was your actual level of communication with him? To that, Johnson responded, we communicated. We met and I spent days with him and was able to get into his head and all the choices he had made. That having been said, I communicated and I went and made the movie, and he was in the middle of Force Awakens. Ultimately, I feel like the choices in it, none of them were born out of an intent to undo anything. They were all born out of the opposite intent of, how do I take this story that JJ wrote, that I really loved, and these characters he created that I really loved, and take them to the next step. Kathy said, we're looking at someone to do the Empire Strikes Back of this series. I took that assignment very seriously, maybe more seriously than some would have liked. I guess to me that didn't mean making something that just had nods to Empire. That meant trying to genuinely do what Empire did. Alright, so I have said many times before, and ironically enough I brought it up in a video a couple days ago, that it's rather strange that you don't see any pictures of these two guys together. No sort of promotional material that came out back in the day of the proverbial passing of the torch of the trilogy. Here is Rian Johnson and JJ Abrams discussing the Star Wars sequel trilogy. There is literally no image of the two of them together online. Now, that doesn't mean they never met. It doesn't mean he is lying here. But I'm not sure there was a ton of communication between them. That is just my feeling. I don't know that, like he says here, that he was trying to undo anything that JJ had done, or that JJ tried to undo anything he had done with Episode 9. But clearly these guys were never on the same page. They were doing their own things entirely. And apparently what Rian Johnson was trying to do was make another Empire Strikes Back, which I don't blame him for. I think that is kind of the right approach. I mean, that is the movie that kind of defined Star Wars in a lot of ways, you could argue. It is because of that film, as I have discussed again in recent videos, that I think we're still here today talking about Star Wars because it was so shocking. It did move the franchise forward, and it was a phenomenal movie to boot. So I'm not upset that Kennedy suggested he make Empire Strikes Back. I'm not upset that he tried to make Empire Strikes Back. I think he just used the wrong character to try and do that. I think using Luke Skywalker the way he did was the biggest mistake of the trilogy. And there are other big mistakes that were made with the trilogy as well. But the simple fact of the matter is, even if you do like what was done with Luke, there are a lot of people who were waiting to see Luke Skywalker as they had imagined and dreamed him to be for 30-some years, or had read about him in the EU for 20-some years at that point. They wanted to see that character so badly that when we got this grumpy Luke, it was devastating. Now again, that's not the only reason people did not like The Last Jedi. It is not The Empire Strikes Back, in my opinion. It's a decent movie if you subtract the Luke thing and several other things that I don't think maybe fit very well with Star Wars, like the Holdo maneuver, which he will answer a question about soon enough here. But it is not The Empire Strikes Back 2.0. It is not even close, and I understand why he tried, but he failed. Alright, next question they asked him was, but just to use an example, Force Awakens sets up Snoke as the big villain of the new trilogy with a mysterious backstory. And then midway through Last Jedi, Kylo Ren slices him in two and takes over the First Order. To that, Johnson responded, that was, in reading JJ's script and watching the dailies and seeing the power of Adam Driver's character, the interrogation scene in the first movie between Rey and Kylo was so incredibly powerful. Seeing this complicated villain that's been created, I was just so compelled by that. This is all a matter of perspective and phrasing, but to me, I didn't easily dispense of Snoke, or with Snoke. I took great pains to use him in the most dramatically impactful way I could, which was to then take Kylo's character to the next level and set him up as well as I possibly could. I guess it all comes down to your point of view. I thought, this is such a compelling and complicated villain, this is who it makes sense going forward to build around. And I don't entirely disagree with him here. I think that Kylo Ren, played by Adam Driver, is the best character in the trilogy in some ways. I think he is the best portrayed, if that makes sense. He is the best acted, and he is very interesting. He is compelling, or really could have been. I think the biggest mistake done with him was at the end of The Force Awakens and having him lose to Rey. That just made no sense whatsoever to me. You're having your new main protagonist, the new hero of the trilogy, you're having her win in the first act of the story, and I know some are going to argue, well, Luke wins, he blows up the Death Star and kind of thwarts Darth Vader, or Han Solo kind of does it, and Anakin blows up the droid control ship, so it's the same thing, right? Well, not exactly. Luke blowing up the Death Star was done because, well, it could have just been one movie. There was absolutely no guarantee of a sequel, so to have Luke not win in the end would have felt very strange. As for Anakin, well, we know he's going to become Darth Vader. Setting him up to be a pretty powerful character from the start isn't the worst idea. Not to mention he kind of accidentally blows the damn thing up. Plus, he's not even the main character of that movie. So you really can't compare Rey's success in her first movie to those two because they're just very different. The intent and what is going to happen or what is known at the time was very different. We knew this was going to be a trilogy. They should have, Rian Johnson, JJ Abrams, and everybody else, should have sat down and mapped out the characters. Because you did end up wasting good characters and good actors. Again, I think Kylo Ren could have been, and kind of was in the first movie. I know some people call him emo or whatever, but I think he was a pretty solid character. There was an interesting idea there of him being pulled to the light and being haunted by the legacy of his family. I mean, Han Solo is his dad, Luke Skywalker is his uncle, and Leia is his mother. And so there was an interesting idea there. I agree that he should have been explored further. I disagree with the way the first movie ends, where he is basically beaten by Rey because she closes her eyes and lets the Force in. And if Rian Johnson really wanted to build him up, he should have had her really defeating Rey at the end of The Last Jedi. Instead, she just declines his offer, she declines the extended hand and gets away, and he looks like a fool after losing to Luke. And yeah, you did kind of the same thing JJ did. You made him look kind of pathetic and weak in the end, and so by the time episode 9 rolls around, we're not going to take this guy seriously. Okay, and the next question they asked him was, where did the idea for doing the Holdo maneuver come from? And his response? It came from A New Hope. It was always in my head when Han tells Luke that without the right calculations they could fly into a star, and that'd end your trip really quick, wouldn't it? I thought, well, if that's physically possible, what would that look like? It seemed like something that was a low-hanging fruit to me in a way. But I knew that if I were going to use it, we have to use it in a very big way. This can't be a casual thing that happens this week. We should build the whole Return of the Jedi-esque 3 plotlines converging thing around this moment. Alright, so the exact quote from A New Hope that Han says to Luke is, "Traveling through hyperspace ain't like dusting crops, boy. Without precise calculations, we could fly right through a star or bounce too close to a supernova, and that'd end your trip real quick, wouldn't it?" Okay, so how I interpret that line is, if I am going through hyperspace, which is technically supposed to be a different dimension in Star Wars, but if I am going through hyperspace and I go through a star or a supernova, that is going to be really, really bad for me, not for the star or the supernova. I am not going to take the Millennium Falcon and jump into hyperspace and fly through a star and blow it up. If that were the case, we don't need Death Stars or Starkiller Base. We can just fly ships through stars and blow up entire systems, no problem. Which, of course, is the problem with the Holdo maneuver already, that if we can just use ships to fly into other ships and destroy them, everybody would just make small ships to fly into bigger ships, and they would use droids, and it would be a mess. Anyway, I think the problem with flying too close to a star is if you are in hyperspace, yes, it is a different dimension, but perhaps the gravity pulls you out of hyperspace and then suddenly you're in a star and you are vaporized instantly. Not again that there is something about colliding with other things in hyperspace, though the High Republic decided to go ahead and do something like that, but regardless, I don't think Han was saying if we jump and our coordinates are wrong, we could fly into another ship and cause a massive explosion. Again, if that were possible, and I know people try to argue against this all the time, I have discussed the Holdo maneuver at length in many videos, but if that were possible, that would be what everybody does. They would make small ships, they would take asteroids even, or whatever it might be. They could take a chunk of debris, slap a hyperdrive on it, use a droid or program it to fly into something else, to fly into a planet, and you would just be blowing stuff up left and right. It would be relatively cheap, certainly much, much, much cheaper than building a Death Star. And that's simply what everybody would do. That is why people are upset about the Holdo maneuver. Yes, it looks cool on screen, sure, but it calls into question the tactics of every military engagement throughout the history of the galaxy if it works. Alright, on to the next question. They asked Johnson, in The Rise of Skywalker, there's a scene where someone asks why they don't just do the Holdo maneuver with an unmanned ship, and someone else says that it's a 1,000,000-to-1 shot that will never work again. There are a few other things like that in the film, including undoing the idea that Rey was a nobody, and instead is Palpatine's granddaughter. When you saw the movie, or when you learned that they were doing some of those things, how did you feel about it? To that, Johnson responded, when I saw the movie, I had a great time watching it. Again, this is all about point of view. I never approached this as, like, a territory I'm carving out for my thing. In my perspective, JJ did the same thing with the third that I did with the second, which is not digging it up and undoing, just telling the story the way that was most compelling going forward. That means not just validating what came before, but recontextualizing it and evolving it and changing as the story moves forward. I didn't feel resentful in some way, but you're talking about a movie made by my friends with my friends in it. I sit down to watch a movie and it's a Star Wars movie. It's all stuff I love. I'm not the one to come to for hard-hitting critique. You can go to YouTube for that. And no matter what Rian Johnson says here, there is no doubt it feels like a game of tug-of-war was played between the trilogy, or between the two directors and writers here, between Johnson and Abrams, that they both had their own ideas that were unique and different from each other, and when it was one's turn, they did their own thing, and when the other one came along, they did their own thing. You can say it just was recontextualizing and running with certain ideas and all of that. But in all reality, we ended up with a trilogy that is just an incoherent mess. And that is the big problem with one trying to take the ball and running with it, and then the other one taking the ball and running with it and having no concern over what the other one was doing. I still cannot believe they were allowed to just do their own thing based on the idea that, well, the original trilogy had all different directors and writers, so we'll just do that again and it's magically going to work as well. Okay, and let's move on. There are like 2 questions left, or 2 Star Wars questions left. If you want to read the whole interview, I will try to remember to put a link to it in the description below. Anyway, they asked him, what happened with the other Star Wars trilogy there were talks of you doing? And to that he responded, nothing really happened with it. We had a great time working together, and they said, let's keep doing it. I said, great. I would kick ideas around with Kathy. The short version is Knives Out happened. I went off and made Knives Out and was off to the races, busy making murder mysteries. It's the sort of thing if, down the line, there's an opportunity to do it or do something else in Star Wars, I would be thrilled. But right now I'm just doing my own stuff and pretty happy. And I do think that is at least a half-truth. I'm sure he is very busy with doing his murder mysteries, with Knives Out being very successful, and then he's got a sequel and even more coming, so I'm sure he is probably focused on doing his own thing. But at the same time, I don't really think Star Wars would want him back. I don't think Lucasfilm and Disney would want him back. He's just too controversial. I know some people say that if he did his own trilogy, if he did something separate from the Skywalker saga in his own little corner of the galaxy, it could really be good, and maybe it would be. Maybe it wouldn't. Hard to say, but I don't think he's ever going to get that opportunity. I've been saying that for years at this point, that it is just never going to happen, that there's no way they would want him back, and just all the negative publicity that would come with it. There are just way too many fans that do not like him, that would not go see his movie, and would do everything they actively could to dissuade others from going to see it as well. Alright, and the final Star Wars related question they asked him was also about the trilogy he was going to do, and they said, or asked, how far did you get in terms of an idea? Was there a whole thing mapped out, at least for what the first of these would be? And to that he simply said, it was all very conceptual. I made Knives Out fairly quickly after. There was never any outlines or treatments or anything. And yeah, not all too surprising. I mean, they kind of play this off as if this was a potential thing and not an actual announcement. That first question was like, what happened with the other Star Wars trilogy there were talks of you doing? You mean that big announcement that happened like 3 or 4 months before The Last Jedi came out, where they announced you would be doing a trilogy? It is still, the article is still on StarWars.com, where last I checked it was. This was not like an idea tossed into the wind that might happen. This seemed pretty concrete. And then, again, yes, Knives Out happened, and he went in another direction, and The Last Jedi happened, and I think Lucasfilm decided to go in another direction as well. Alright, well, I think that is going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn. Take to the comments below and tell me what you think of these answers. What do you think of what Rian Johnson had to say about The Last Jedi and Star Wars in general? Do you like and agree with what he is saying? Do you think he's full of BS? Whatever the case may be, though, leave those comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.